What's up, everybody? Mike DOLCE, four-time world MMA Trainer of the Year, talking about the controversy. Islam Makhachev, yes, has been accused by Dan Hooker and Alexander Volkanovski of cheating using intravenous rehydration, which is prohibited by USADA, the drug testing partner of the UFC. And I just happen to have right here the rules to see if Islam in fact did cheat or if it's just sour grapes by our Kiwi friends. So, intravenous IV infusions are prohibited by the UFC, but what is the IV rule? The IV infusions and or injections of more than 100 milliliters, which is like 7 tablespoons worth of fluid, per 12-hour period, both in and out of competition, except for those legitimately received in the course of hospital treatment, surgical procedures, clinical diagnosis, investigations, and or received that are determined to be medically justified. Blah, blah, blah. So, here's the rule. Here's how it goes. Can an athlete use IV rehydration? Now, this is a stupid rule. Let me explain why it's stupid. It's a stupid rule because many athletes cannot adequately orally rehydrate during their weight cutting process or after the weight cut or after weigh-ins or certainly after the face-off because they get stressed out. Have you ever gone on a first date? Have you ever had to put on a performance? Maybe you were in the local theater, at school. Maybe it's your first job interview or a presentation in your job interview or in front of your class. You were nervous. Were you hungry that day? You couldn't keep any food or fluids down. You didn't want to drink or eat anything, and you probably had a little case of diarrhea and or nausea. This is due to nerves. Oftentimes, UFC athletes, once they do the weigh-ins, they have thousands of fans screaming for them, and Joe Rogan and Dana White, and everybody's there. Then there's their opponent who wants to beat them up. They get a little nervous. And when you are nervous, your body rejects food and fluids. It becomes very difficult to adequately orally rehydrate after undergoing a weight cut. Now, that's the fact. Unfortunately, USADA, in their infinite wisdom, USADA sucks. Very, in my opinion, very partisan. We see these retroactive TUEs for athletes that they just have favor for, and then we see individuals get 2-year suspensions for silly over-the-counter compounds. USADA is just silly. But anyway, this is legalized cheating, in my opinion. They allow some athletes to slide through, and some athletes they do not allow to slide through. But regardless, Dan Hooker said a local nurse had told him that she was solicited by Islam's camp, and she actually rehydrated Islam intravenously. That is illegal. What is USADA going to do about it? Well, nothing. It's illegal, but USADA doesn't enforce the rule. USADA never enforces the rule. And in fact, I know of 0 instances of USADA ever enforcing the rule. 0. How many athletes do I know that have used IVs after weighing in? Half the card. I will say, in my opinion, half the card uses IVs. Mostly non-U.S. based athletes. Now, this isn't nationalism on my part. I don't really care. But the U.S. athletes are terrified of USADA. That's just is what it is. And I think that's simply because USADA has more representatives here. United States Anti-Doping Agency, right? So USADA has a much stronger pool of technicians and inspectors, and their HQ and all that is here. It's easier for them to squeeze the U.S. athletes. And in fact, some USC athletes leave the United States so they can go and dope. And if you think long and hard, you can probably come up with a few well-financed athletes that love to travel around and train simply so they can dope and not get chased down by the USADA inspectors who simply don't have the budget to go out there and find them. That's a real story also. But anyway, Dan Hooker, if Dan Hooker is accurate, if you make such a bold statement, Dan Hooker, who I like Dan a lot, I like Dan's team a lot, I love all those guys, big fan of those guys. But you cannot make a statement like that and not have facts. You gotta, if you're going to even bring it up, Dan, then you have to Prove it. You have to have the nurse come forward and prove it. You have to say the name of the nurse and prove it. You have to give evidence. Otherwise, it does sound like sour grapes. And that's what Islam's team's saying. Their manager just came out and said, these are just sore losers who are trying to make a story where none exists. Now it's up to Dan Hooker to come back and say, no, in fact, Sheila Jones or Jim Jones, whoever the nurse is, factually, they told me that they did it. They told me that Islam did it. So, boom, what are you going to do with that? Unless Dan does that, there's no story here. USADA will not follow up. USADA will not do anything about this because USADA doesn't do anything about this. They never have. USADA has never chased down any IV infraction. They don't test for plasticides as they say that they will. They don't do that. 0 athletes have ever been busted for using IVs, outside of those athletes who intentionally disclose that they did. I know my buddy Chael Sonnen brought up something with BJ Penn a while ago. BJ disclosed that he used an IV for some medical thing and got flagged by USADA. Such a joke. It's a joke, but it is what it is. What do you guys think? Did Islam cheat? Does Dan have to come forward with evidence? Or is this all just a nothing burger? And why do I have my shirt off?